What if I told you that there's a country quietly eating China's lunch while the whole world is distracted by trade wars? You'd probably think I'm crazy, right? Well, what's happening in Southeast Asia right now is going to shatter everything you thought you knew about Asian power dynamics. While everyone's obsessing over US-China tensions, Vietnam has been pulling off one of the most spectacular transformations in modern history, and Beijing is absolutely losing its mind over it. This country that was bombed back to the Stone Age 50 years ago is now growing faster than China, stealing investments, and building alliances that directly challenge Chinese dominance. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to discuss: Vietnam isn't just competing with China, they're systematically dismantling Chinese regional strategy. Every Vietnamese success represents a crack in China's influence, and Beijing is watching their inevitable Asian century slip away, one Vietnamese victory at a time. The curiosities surrounding this David versus Goliath story are so compelling that the entire region is reshuffling strategies around Vietnamese potential. Look, there's something absolutely mind-blowing happening in Southeast Asia that most people aren't paying attention to. Vietnam's geographic transformation over the past few decades reads like a phoenix rising from ashes, and it's one of those curiosities geographicas that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about economic recovery. This narrow strip of land, stretching along the South China Sea like a dragon's spine, has managed to turn its strategic position from a curse of constant conflict into a blessing of unprecedented growth. The same geography that once made Vietnam a battleground for superpowers has now become its greatest asset in the global supply chain revolution. What's fascinating about Vietnam's rise is how the country has leveraged its unique geographical features to create what economists call a manufacturing miracle. The Mekong Delta in the south provides agricultural abundance, while the Red River Delta in the north offers industrial potential. It's like having two economic engines running simultaneously in one nation. These curiosities about Vietnam's dual geographic advantages have allowed the country to diversify its economy in ways that even China struggled with during its early development phases. The 3,260-kilometer coastline isn't just beautiful, it's a strategic goldmine that connects Vietnam to major shipping routes, making it an irresistible destination for international investors looking for alternatives to Chinese manufacturing. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is one of those geographia insights that'll blow your mind. Vietnam's location puts it right in the sweet spot of Southeast Asian trade routes, essentially making it impossible for any major power, including China, to ignore its growing influence. The country sits at the crossroads of some of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and every container ship passing through carries billions in trade value. This geographic advantage has transformed Vietnam from a war-torn nation into what many experts now call the next Asian tiger, and the ripple effects of this transformation are just beginning to be felt across the region. Vietnam's economic transformation isn't just impressive, it's downright shocking when you consider where this country was just 30 years ago. We're talking about a nation that went from being one of the poorest countries in Asia to achieving GDP growth rates that make even China's leadership take notice, and that's saying something. The curiosities surrounding Vietnam's economic miracle reveal a strategic approach that's been flying under the radar while everyone's been focused on the US-China trade war. This Southeast Asian nation has quietly positioned itself as the manufacturing hub that global companies didn't know they desperately needed until supply chain disruptions hit the world like a freight train. What makes this even more remarkable is how Vietnam has managed to maintain this explosive growth while navigating the complex geopolitical waters between major powers. The numbers tell a story that reads like economic fiction, but it's absolutely real. Vietnam's foreign direct investment has been skyrocketing, with companies like Samsung, Intel, and Nike shifting massive operations from China to Vietnamese soil. These aren't just small curiosities geographicas, we're talking about fundamental shifts in global manufacturing that are reshaping the entire Asian economic landscape. The country's strategic position allows it to serve both as a gateway to Southeast Asian markets and as a cost-effective alternative to Chinese production, creating what economists call a Goldilocks zone, not too expensive like developed nations, not too underdeveloped like frontier markets. This sweet spot has made Vietnam the darling of international investors who are constantly seeking that perfect balance of cost, quality, and political stability. Here's what most people don't realize about Vietnam's rise. It's not just about cheap labor anymore. The country has been systematically upgrading its infrastructure, education system, and technological capabilities in ways that would make any developed nation proud. The government's strategic vision includes becoming a middle-income country by 2030, and frankly, they're ahead of schedule. These geographic advantages, combined with a young, educated workforce and pro-business policies, have created an economic momentum that's becoming increasingly difficult for China to ignore. Vietnam isn't just competing with China. In many sectors, it's actually starting to outperform its giant neighbor, and that's a development that's sending shockwaves through Beijing's corridors of power. Vietnam's economic transformation isn't just impressive, it's downright shocking when you consider where this country was just 30 years ago. We're talking about a nation that went from being one of the poorest countries in Asia to achieving GDP growth rates that make even China's leadership take notice, and that's saying something. The curiosities surrounding Vietnam's economic miracle reveal a strategic approach that's been flying under the radar while everyone's been focused on the US-China trade war. This Southeast Asian nation has quietly positioned itself as the manufacturing hub that global companies didn't know they desperately needed until supply chain disruptions hit the world like a freight train. What makes this even more remarkable is how Vietnam has managed to maintain this explosive growth while navigating the complex geopolitical waters between major powers. The numbers tell a story that reads like economic fiction, but it's absolutely real. Vietnam's foreign direct investment has been skyrocketing, with companies like Samsung, Intel, and Nike shifting massive operations from China to Vietnamese soil. These aren't just small curiosities geographicas, we're talking about fundamental shifts in global manufacturing that are reshaping the entire Asian economic landscape. The country's strategic position allows it to serve both as a gateway to Southeast Asian markets and as a cost-effective alternative to Chinese production, creating what economists call a Goldilocks zone, not too expensive like developed nations, not too underdeveloped like frontier markets. This sweet spot has made Vietnam the darling of international investors who are constantly seeking that perfect balance of cost, quality, and political stability. Here's what most people don't realize about Vietnam's rise. It's not just about cheap labor anymore. The country has been systematically upgrading its infrastructure, education system, and technological capabilities in ways that would make any developed nation proud. The government's strategic vision includes becoming a middle-income country by 2030, and frankly, they're ahead of schedule. These geographic advantages, combined with a young, educated workforce and pro-business policies, have created an economic momentum that's becoming increasingly difficult for China to ignore. Vietnam isn't just competing with China. In many sectors, it's actually starting to outperform its giant neighbor, and that's a development that's sending shockwaves through Beijing's corridors of power. The economic relationship between China and Vietnam is like watching a high-stakes poker game where both players are holding cards close to their chest, and honestly, it's one of the most intriguing curiosities in modern international relations. China remains Vietnam's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade reaching over $170 billion annually. That's serious money that can't be ignored by either side. But here's where it gets really interesting. While Vietnamese businesses are making bank from Chinese investments and trade, the Vietnamese government is simultaneously implementing policies to reduce economic dependence on their giant neighbor. This delicate dance between economic pragmatism and strategic independence showcases how smaller nations can navigate great power competition without shooting themselves in the foot financially. What's absolutely fascinating about this relationship is how Vietnam has been quietly diversifying its economic partnerships while maintaining the facade of friendly cooperation with China. Vietnamese companies have been increasingly looking towards South Korea, Japan, and the United States for investment and technology transfer, essentially creating what economists call economic hedging. These Curiosities Geographicas reveal a nation that's learned from history. Vietnam remembers what happened to countries that became too economically dependent on a single great power. The government has been strategically encouraging foreign direct investment from multiple sources, ensuring that no single country, including China, can use economic leverage as a political weapon. This approach has resulted in one of the most balanced foreign investment portfolios in Southeast Asia. The infrastructure development projects tell an even more compelling story about this complex relationship. China's Belt and Road Initiative has poured billions into Vietnamese infrastructure, from highways to power plants, but Vietnam has been careful to maintain control over strategic assets and avoid the debt trap diplomacy that has ensnared other developing nations. Vietnamese leaders have mastered the art of taking Chinese money while maintaining strategic autonomy. They're essentially eating China's lunch while keeping their own kitchen. This sophisticated approach to economic statecraft demonstrates that Vietnam isn't just riding the wave of Chinese investment, it's actively shaping the terms of engagement in ways that serve Vietnamese interests first and foremost. The question isn't whether China is a partner or threat. Vietnam has figured out how to make China both simultaneously. Vietnam's geopolitical strategy is pure genius, and it's one of those curiosities that demonstrates how a mid-sized power can outmaneuver superpowers through sheer strategic brilliance. The country has been playing what diplomats call bamboo diplomacy, bending with the wind but never breaking, maintaining flexibility while staying rooted in national interests. This approach has allowed Vietnam to simultaneously deepen economic ties with China, strengthen security partnerships with the United States, and expand cooperation with regional powers like Japan and India. What makes this strategy particularly remarkable is how Vietnam has managed to avoid the binary choice that many countries face in today's multipolar world. You don't have to pick Team America or Team China when you're smart enough to create your own team. The practical implementation of this balancing act reads like a masterclass in international relations. Vietnam hosts joint military exercises with the U.S. Navy while maintaining party-to-party relations with the Chinese Communist Party. Talk about walking a diplomatic tightrope without a safety net. These geographia advantages have enabled Vietnam to position itself as an indispensable partner for multiple great powers simultaneously. The country has been strategically upgrading its military capabilities through diversified arms purchases from Russia, the United States, and European suppliers, ensuring that no single power can use weapons dependency as leverage. Vietnamese leaders have essentially created a foreign policy insurance policy that protects against economic coercion and military intimidation from any direction. Here's where Vietnam's strategy gets really sophisticated. The country has been actively building what scholars call minilateral partnerships, smaller groupings that serve specific strategic purposes without triggering major power competition. Vietnam's participation in ASEAN, CPTPP, and various trilateral security arrangements demonstrates a nation that understands modern geopolitics isn't just about bilateral relationships anymore. The curiosities surrounding Vietnam's diplomatic maneuvering reveal a country that's learned to leverage its strategic geography and economic dynamism to punch well above its weight class. While other nations choose sides, Vietnam has chosen to make itself so valuable to all sides that everyone competes for Vietnamese cooperation rather than Vietnamese allegiance. The future of Asia is being written right now, and Vietnam is holding one of the most important pens in this historical narrative. That's not hyperbole, that's geopolitical reality. We're witnessing the emergence of what analysts are calling a multipolar Asia, where China's dominance is no longer guaranteed, and Vietnam's rise is playing a crucial role in this transformation. The curiosities surrounding Vietnam's projected growth trajectory suggest that by 2030, this country could become the fifth largest economy in Southeast Asia, with a GDP that rivals traditional regional powers. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it's about a fundamental shift in how power is distributed across the most economically dynamic region on Earth. Vietnam's success is inspiring other Southeast Asian nations to pursue more independent foreign policies, creating a domino effect that's reshaping the entire regional order. What makes Vietnam's future particularly intriguing is how the country is positioning itself to become a technology and manufacturing hub that could rival South Korea or Taiwan in terms of sophistication and output. Vietnamese tech companies are already making waves in fintech, e-commerce, and digital services, while the country's manufacturing sector is rapidly moving up the value chain from textiles to electronics to automotive assembly. These geographic advantages, combined with strategic investments in education and infrastructure, are creating an economic momentum that's becoming increasingly difficult for any single power to control or contain. The young, tech-savvy Vietnamese population represents a demographic dividend that could fuel decades of sustained growth, making Vietnam one of the most attractive investment destinations in Asia for the foreseeable future. Here's the kicker that's keeping strategists in Beijing, Washington, and Tokyo up at night: Vietnam's rise isn't happening in isolation. The country is actively building partnerships and alliances that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the South China Sea and beyond. Vietnam's growing influence is encouraging other middle powers like Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines to assert their own strategic autonomy, creating what some experts call a concert of middle powers that could collectively balance Chinese influence in the region. The Curiosities Geographicas of this emerging order suggest that the 21st century in Asia won't be dominated by any single hegemon, but rather by a complex web of relationships where countries like Vietnam hold disproportionate influence. The question isn't whether Vietnam will continue to rise, it's how the established powers will adapt to a world where Vietnamese decisions increasingly matter on the global stage. Look, everything we've uncovered about Vietnam's rise isn't just fascinating, it's a masterclass in how power actually shifts in the modern world. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? While most people stay focused on yesterday's power structures, smart individuals recognize these changes early and position themselves accordingly. Vietnam's transformation represents opportunities that most are completely missing. Are you going to be one of them, or will you start paying attention to where the real action is happening? The geography of power is shifting right before our eyes. Don't let this knowledge just sit there, use it to understand global markets, investment opportunities, and where the world is actually heading. If this opened your eyes to possibilities you hadn't considered, smash that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. We're uncovering the hidden forces reshaping our world, and you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next.